First of all, we're going to begin.
Uh-huh.
So thank you for letting me come to your home.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's always an honor, and glad we got to meet at the
Marine Corps League.
Marine Corps League honoring Purple Heart. So that's how we met. So that was a good event. So I'm really glad that we were able to meet there. But just for the record, let's start. Today is Friday, October 7th, 2022. We are in Milton, Georgia. My name is Susan Kahlo, and I am conducting this interview of the Veterans History Project that we will be contributing it to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. You'll also get your own copy, your family.
All right.
This is just something that I do. It's my way to honor veterans, so
well,
it's always, yes, I love to do this, and it's just, and I know how much it's appreciated for other people who don't get the honor of sitting down with a veteran and have a conversation. So if you wouldn't mind, just to start off, if you would give your name and spell your name.
Okay, my name is Michael Theodore Lambert III. MICHAELTHEODORELAMBERTIII.
Okay. And what branch of the service were you? Are you in, or were you in?
I was in the Marine Corps.
Okay.
And I was a commissioned officer and received my commission through the PLC program, the Platoon Leader class. And between my junior and senior year in college, I went off for 10 weeks to Quantico, Virginia at Officer Candidate School and went through the pre-screening or the candidacy, passed through, and then went back to college and finished up my my senior year in college. I received a bachelor's degree in history from Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama. And upon graduation, I was commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. And immediately after graduation, I went up to Quantico, Virginia, and began the basic school, which is the, I think it was 21 weeks of training after you are commissioned to become an infantry officer. My basic school class was 6-67. We had 250 young second lieutenants in our class. And by the time we graduated, we all graduated in November of 1967. And most of us went either to flight school or to artillery school, or those of us that were designated as infantry officers. 03 is the Marine Corps designation for infantry. We went straight to Vietnam. We were considered 0301 coming out of the training, which is an untested infantry officer. And after 6 months, we were redesignated 0302 after 6 months in the job.
Oh, okay. Well, to set the stage, so wind back a bit. So where's your hometown?
Atlanta. I grew up in Buckhead.
Okay. So in a little bit, can you mention a little bit about the family? Were there other family members in the military?
Yes.
That served?
Yes. My grandfather, Michael Lambert, Sr., was born in 1876, the last year of Reconstruction. And his father originally came from Belgium in 1830 and settled in Rome, Georgia, because Atlanta was nothing but a railroad intersection, and they had warehouses and factory, maintenance facilities for the railroad in Atlanta when he came over. And it was also had saloons and brothels. That was Atlanta.
Wow.
And it wasn't until after later on in the mid-1800s that Atlanta began to grow. And it was named Terminus originally, and then became Marthasville after the governor's daughter, and then later Atlanta was named Atlanta.
So your grandfather already was in Rome.
My great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather. So your family's all been from this area?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And my mother, her family's from Tenafly, New Jersey. and my mother and father met. Daddy was in the Navy at the time. He got his commission through Georgia Tech.
Okay.
He was a mechanical engineer from Tech. And he was at Yorktown, Virginia, going through mine warfare school with the Navy as a young Navy lieutenant. And it was a weekend. He and his buddies were single guys, trying to meet somebody. And he ran into my mother, who happened to be visiting her father, who was a Navy commander at the time. He was material officer for the 6th Naval District. And he had come down to Norfolk, and he was living on base at the Norfolk Navy base with my grandmother. And
so he was also Navy?
He was also Navy, yeah.
So were you pretty much indoctrinated? Did you feel growing up with going into the military from the get-go?
I mean, there was no question. To me, that was part of the transition into manhood, was to go through the military. I went to the high school I went to was a Catholic boys military school called Marist. And it was downtown in Atlanta, right next to Sacred Heart. And the seniors ran the school, and the teachers were all Catholic priests, Marist priests. And it was set up as a military battalion. So I
never knew that.
Yeah, and I had no, I mean, there was no question. That was part of the transition from childhood to manhood, was to go through the military.
Okay.
To serve. And at the time, when I was in college, there was a lot of support for I graduated from college in 1967. But prior to that, in the late 50s and early 60s, there was a lot of support for what was going on in Vietnam, for the counterinsurgency. Because if you remember, the Cold War was in full blossom or whatever. And we began to hear the stories of what the communists were doing to people. When I was in grade school, we would receive something called Marino magazine. It would come out every month, and there would be stories of heroic Marino missionaries that were working in China, and the stories of the atrocities that the communists would do especially on Catholics, were just horrible. So early on, we realized that communism was a terrible thing. It attacked the dignity of the individual. I didn't see it quite that way, but I just knew they were the bad guys that had to be stamped out. So there was a lot of support for the Vietnam War, even in the magazine, media. Time magazine, there was always articles about the brave Green Special Forces guys that Kennedy had championed.
Okay.
And he was talking about what they were doing to fight the communists in Southeast Asia. So it was to me, it was just an exciting crusade.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like
noble.
You were closer, getting more information because of the school where you were, in the community you were in.
Yeah.
That somebody that wasn't in the military.
Plus, I was a voracious reader.
Okay.
We didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have. We had TV, but the news came on at 6 o'clock at night, and that was it. So you really didn't have. Even the radio was all filled with bebop music and all that kind of stuff, and the frivolous, stuff. But we didn't really. The only place we could go would be the news magazines. And I was just a voracious reader. I loved the history.
In high school, you were like that?
Oh, in grade school.
In grade school?
Yeah.
So you always had an interest in that. So by the time you were graduating in '67, it was ramping up in Vietnam.
I couldn't wait to get over there. Yeah.
Really?
I was excited. And I never even. I mean, to me, people that were drafted were not. I had my platoon, and we would provide security, road sweep security for the combat engineers. There was about a 6-mile road, gravel road, that ran from the combat base at An Hoa up to Liberty Bridge, and it was our main supply line for to get supplies into the base. So at night, the communists would come out on the road, the gravel road, and plant landmines. So every morning, the routine was the engineers would have to sweep the road. I mean, going up and down looking for mines. And we would provide security because the Viet Cong snipers would try to shoot the engineers.
On the road.
Yeah, on the road. So my first contact with the enemy was about the second road sweep we did. We started taking sniper fire. And we dropped to the muddy gravel road. I think it had just rained that night. So it was like jumping in, it was nasty. So we dropped to the gravel road, and my training kicked in. I grabbed my map, got a compass reading on where the sniper was, and got on the radio and called back for a fire mission. And knew exactly where I was. And you could hear the guns at Anwa shoot, boom, boom, boom. They shot 3 rounds. And you could hear those big, probably 105 rounds coming over the top of us, and they hit the copse of bamboo trees where the
You were able to
sniper
pinpoint
was.
it that closely?
Yeah, because I could see the flashes. The guy was in the woods, in the shadows, in the bamboo. So when he fired, I could see the flash of the where his rifle was.
So you were able to give the coordinates.
Exactly. And those rounds hit right on target, those 3 rounds, and turned that little section of bamboo into toothpicks.
Wow.
And it looked like an earth mover had gone in and plowed up the ground. No more sniper. And I can remember, I told the guys, I said, get down. What the artillery does is they'll give you notice when they fire. And they'll say shot, and you say shot out, and then you get down. So I gave all the guys a notice. I said shot out, and they got down. And then I looked up, and I saw that it was a good hit. And then I looked at all my Marines on either side of me, laying on the road, and I could see they were looking at me. And I was the brand new second lieutenant.
I started to ask about that.
And,
You're the newbie.
And so I looked at him and sort of grinned. I put a shit-eating grin on my face, and I said, if my mother could see me now. And they started howling. It was funny. And from then on, we felt connected.
Oh, that's great.
And we did many patrols together back up in the jungle. And
well, I started to ask you because you're coming in, but you've got in your platoon some seasoned soldiers.
But Marines. You don't say soldiers.
I'm sorry, that's true. Excuse me. I do know that. I know that. I know that. You can get me for that.
So anyway, they would just catch, 18. Some of them were 17. They lied about their ages, but they had the deadest look on their face. It was like the joy had been sucked out of them, but they were good Marines. They'd been well trained, and so we got really close. And I felt like it was my job to do the mission first, but then also protect those men, keep them. There's a saying in the Marine Corps among the officers, your men always eat first. And what that means is you prefer them to yourself. You make sure they have what they need. They understand what has to go, what has to happen. But you take care of them, and that builds a bond of trust in the combat unit that I don't think, I didn't even see that in the Army Rangers when I went through training at the Ranger School.
Really?
Yeah.
It sounds like you established that right from the get-go.
Yeah.
That they knew you were precise, you took care of the sniper.
Technically I was proficient.
You were proficient.
Yeah, and I often wonder where that came from, and I think growing up in my family business, grading, these guys, they were rough guys, and these tractor operators were just, very, as my dad said, my mother would say, they're very common, but they were just tough guys, simple guys. So I could relate to them, I understood them, I could communicate with them. So that helped me a lot as far as preparing to be an infantry officer. I enjoyed my men, and they knew it, they sensed that.
So was that their assigned, like, MOS, or did they?
Yeah, they were 0311.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was sort of why, to be honest, because I know that sometimes there's mixed or joint operations. That the Marines might have led something, but then I sometimes think of the Army doing like, construction and building. So that was kind of that's my excuse for saying soldiers. Letting that slip, but I won't. But that's really important. But that also seems to have been your establishing the service, and your mission is just what you're all about.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, it came natural for you.
It was just I just stepped into it. Yeah.
Very seriously.
Yeah.
So and the men that you had, about how many were there in your platoon?
There was 45. There were 3 squads of 12 men each, and then there was a squad leader. And we had. Within the squad, there was 3 fire teams, and we had I had my radio operator. We had 2 radio operators in the platoon. Had a corpsman, a platoon sergeant, and a right guide. So, yeah, it comes to 45.
So where would you have downtime together? Was it too intense, or? Like in the course of a day, what was the routine like? Or you were rotating the men, but you also had to take care of yourself. So what was a day like?
Well, we spent very little time at the combat base. At the time, the Marines, what they did was they kept all their combat Marines out in the field. And you were either on road security, which absolutely mind-boring, you know. You'd sit in the hot sun all day at a location, and at night you patrol. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
At night you patrol looking for, setting up ambushes. And looking for sign of infiltration. And during the day you'd patrol as well. The whole objective was to keep that road clear. That was the vital lifeline to the combat base, whether we had the artillery and all that.
Did you have equipment to detect explosives or things that were put on the road? Or
the engineers were.
Okay.
We didn't actually deal with the mines. If you saw something you thought was a mine, you'd either get maybe a quarter of a stick of C4, stick a cap in it and crank it off, or because we didn't always have the combat engineers with us either. The area that we fought in at Anwa was notorious for booby traps. I mean, that was my first experience with a booby trap. Was we were going into a village, what they call in a clearing action. We were going in actually looking for caches of rice. And weapons, and they would often hide them in the huts, dig tunnels or something under the huts. But I went through a hedgerow. My platoon went through a hedgerow, and the hedgerow itself was bamboo. It was a ditch with bamboo planted in it. And there was a gap in it you could walk through where the trail went through. And I can remember at the low spot in the trail where it went through the hedgerow, there was trash, maybe flattened beer can, and I forget exactly, some candy wrappers or something. And right away, something in me just said, shouldn't be there. And because the Vietnamese, you never saw trash in the Vietnamese village. They used everything. They flattened out our beer cans and made shingles for the roofs.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it was just amazing.
Recycled.
Yeah. Yeah, in spades. So I told my radio operator as I went through the hedgerow, I said, "It looks like something is funny in that ditch down there." His name was Luis Reyes, and he was carrying my radio for me behind me. And I said, "Jump this ditch, Luis." So I jumped the ditch and took about 4 steps, and this big explosion went off. And I was slammed to the ground. And afterwards, I stood up, and the stench of TNT was horrible. You know, just it's a horrible smell. And I looked back, and there was a big crater where that trash had been in the bottom. And sitting on the edge of the crater was Luis Reyes, and both his legs had been blown off at the knees. And I can remember seeing one of his feet, one of his the lower part of it might have been his left leg, with the boot still on it, and it was the raw, you know, and just the raw meat was on the top of the boot there, where his leg was still inside, his foot was still inside the boot.
Oh, God.
And I looked at him, and he was conscious. And I said, Reyes, what happened? I told you to jump that ditch. He said, I fucked up, Lieutenant. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use that word, but
Yeah,
he said,
okay, that's okay.
I said, you sure did, Boudreaux. And so I got the, we got the, it didn't hurt the radio. And we called in a med-evac. And within about 15 minutes, there was a helicopter there that picked him up, took him out to the repose offshore. The Navy was great about our medevacs. And he survived.
Oh, wow. Oh, thank
Yeah,
goodness.
he's from, I want to say he's up in either Brooklyn or the Bronx up there. That's where he lives.
Did he lose both legs?
He lost both legs, yeah. We left him in the field. We didn't put him on the stretcher. And after the helicopter left, I turned around and the bamboo had been shredded. But in the bamboo was a letter that he'd been reading. That's why he stepped down. He'd been reading, I guess, a letter from his girlfriend or from home. And that's why he wasn't paying much attention.
He was
He was distracted.
distracted.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, wow.
But you know, that really, I mean, that was typical of the Anwa area. Those kind of big booby traps.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we used to call them box mines, but they would take explosives, typically communist TNT.
Mm-hmm.
And either that or I discarded hand grenades or dud artillery shells. They get the kids to dig them up, and if they blew up, it was no big deal because they could always replace the kids with another child. But they would use our duds as well. So, but that place was just overridden with booby traps, and the purpose of the booby trap was to deny us access or give warning of our approach. So they would put the booby traps on likely avenues of approach, like a trail or the walkway between rice paddies.
Yeah, it would be kind of hard. It is kind of incredible that you could even avoid it because the pathways and you're going through jungles, and when you clear a path, they're going to anticipate where.
Or what you're going to stop here and take a break before you cross the stream, or. You know,
that you have to constantly be alert. So you had, so that was.
So that was that we did that from November until mid-January, and then mid-January '68, we did what was called. I think the plan was it was called Operation Checkers, and we moved up to the area to the stretch of road from north of Da Nang, from Langko village, which was right over the Hai Van Pass from Da Nang, on Route 1. And we had to cover Route 1 from Langko all the way up to, almost up to Phi Bai. It's about I guess, I want to say a 20-kilometer stretch of road. So the battalion commander figured out what they were going to do is it would put small units of Marines up and down that road in strong points, and again we do the patrolling and stuff like that to try to minimize the enemy's access to the road. That was kind of not a good plan, but we didn't have the people.
But
or
then
the
you were
equipment.
using that road as well. That was a
That
way
road,
you were using
that
for your
road
main
was the
transport.
access, was the only access. That was Highway 1. The only access from the deep water pier at Da Nang to the DMZ, which was up north of Hue, up along, was the DMZ was the border between South Vietnam and North Vietnam.
Yeah,
So
you
the
hear the
main-
highway, yeah, so it
and-
was like a constant, it had to have been a very constant, you're patrolling to clear it, because you were constantly using it, but then the enemy's also replacing when you take something
Absolutely.
away, then they're putting.
And they saw that as a high priority. If they could interdict the road, if they could interdict National Highway 1, it would slow down the supplies of, especially artillery rounds, going up to the Marine bases at Quang Tri, Con Tien, the Rock Pile, and Khe Sanh. And at the time, this was right before the Khe Sanh siege began. So the Marines were firing artillery night and day. TV Center.
It was women and children.
Women and children, yeah, young babies.
They're probably scared to death.
Scared to death. They had taken refuge in it was 35 of them, and they had taken refuge in the basement of that church. And so I sent them back, pushed them out of my mind, didn't even think about it. I was so exhausted. I was a machine. And then I got a call from the company commander, said, Mike, we spotted some North Vietnamese soldiers behind the church, in the building behind the church. So we got in a terrible firefight. This is the 11th of February, right? And then continued intensive, aggressive fighting. And then on the 13th of February, we were digging up, we tried to find, there were a lot of Americans and Europeans that had been executed by the communists. We were trying to get a list of who they were, so we'd dig up the graves. So we were digging up a grave in the backyard of some really nice looking home, looking for bodies, and turned out to be a North Vietnamese soldier who had been buried. And all of a sudden a blast went off in front of, it was a company commander, another second lieutenant from another platoon leader, and me. And this blast went off. And I think it was probably either a mortar round or RPG. And it caught the company commander in the side of his legs, and he had his flak jacket on, so it caught in the arm, and caught the other lieutenant in the neck with a piece of metal, and it caught me in the groin. I got right in the stomach there, and we were both, all three of us were medevaced. All three of us lived.
Were you conscious?
Oh yeah, I mean I walked out. I was bleeding all over the place, but I still had control of my platoon. And we pulled away, and the corpsman said, "You have to. I'm medevacing you, Lieutenant," because I didn't realize I'd been hit. Because I was more concerned about trying to find out who was trying to shoot at us. And then the skipper was laying down, and we started to get mortared. And I can remember the gunny laying on top of the wounded skipper, to protect him, because we loved Captain Christmas. And
this was Captain. Okay.
Yeah, Ron Christmas.
Ron.
And his father-in-law, Colonel Lowndes, was commander of the Marines at Khe Sanh.
Oh wow.
So his wife Sherry grew up as a Marine brat. Yeah. Anyway, so we got Ron and Ken Kromer, who was the other lieutenant. We got them medevaced, and I was medevaced down to Phi Bai. And I got down to Phi Bai, and I can remember standing in line to get cut on, to cut the metal out. And there was a guy in a stretcher in front of me, so it was in this plywood hut with oil. They used diesel fuel to keep the dust down there. I mean, it was just a shack.
Makeshift.
It looked like MASH, some of
yeah.
Yeah. So I get into the operating room, and I get up on the table, and they gave me some Novocaine or whatever, and cut the metal out, sewed me up, and the other two officers had been medevaced out of country. Ron went to Japan, and I think Kromer went to Japan as well. So I stayed there in Phi Bai, and I was laying in the next day. I was laying in the hospital in Phi Bai, and enjoying it. I had 3 meals a day, clean sheets.
That's when you got your Purple Heart.
Yeah.
Did they pin it on you then, or
No,
how?
no.
How did they? Yeah, how was?
They sort of handed it to me when I got down to division headquarters. They said, "Here, you do one of these," and they gave me this thing too. And sort of handed it to you. So it was not a big deal. And so
You had to go. You weren't leaving country. You weren't.
no, but I was enjoying being in the hospital
Yeah,
in
you
Phi
got a little
Bai.
bit of rest.
And the first
food.
sergeant in Phi Bai, we had a rear area company headquarters there in Phi Bai. Hotel company did, and the first sergeant of hotel company comes over. First Sergeant Uriegas. He's big. He's not real big, but he was very, a Marine's Marine.
Mm-hmm.
Big handlebar, black mustache with mustache wax on it, and gravelly voice. And he said, "Lieutenant, understand you got hit." I said, "Yeah, I'm enjoying this." He said, "Well, you know what?" And he had a way of making you feel like about this big. He said, "I hope you're enjoying it, but you're the last officer that's left in the company, and your Marines are still fighting up in Hue." And within an hour, I was on a helicopter going. I snuck out of the hospital and went back into the fighting, and I didn't even have the stitches out. So I was several days after that, my corpsman came up to me and said, "Lieutenant, let me look at your wound." And he looked at the wound. He says, "We can take those stitches out now." I said, "Okay." He said, "Just drop trout right there." And I was right in the middle of all my guys, So he said, "Drop trout." So I did. We didn't wear underwear. We went commando all the time. So I dropped my pants down, and the doc squatted down and started picking out the stitches. And he'd hold up. "Here's another stitch from the lieutenant." And the platoon would, "Yay, lieutenant!"
That's how little comic relief.
Yeah, I mean that's
I
I was the entertainment. So yeah, that was about the not the 18th, 13th. I was wounded, so it must have been about the 14th or so or 15th. I went back into Hue, and we stayed there till the I think we came out the 2nd of March in trucks back down to Phi Bai.
Was the intensity still maintained there, or did it?
After we pushed them out of the new area in that house-to-house stuff, we began to push them west, and the Army had set up blocking forces outside way to the west. So we tried to push them into the Army units because they had the helicopters and all that stuff.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
You made it through there.
I did, yeah. And then we went back down south and started working the same area north of Da Nang that I was in. And I did that until, and we worked back in the jungle a lot. We used to go in the jungle, and after they sprayed that, what's that stuff they put on the trees to kill them?
Agent Orange?
Yeah. So the Army would fly, the Air Force would fly over our position and then open the sprayers up, and it looked like they were raining on the trees. And then that's the area we patrolled in. We didn't know what that stuff was. We thought it was
nobody did.
No, it was herbicide. So I had a few extra exciting moments after Hue, but I'd begun to get really proficient in my tradecraft, and we got back in the jungle. And jungle fighting is a lot easier than the urban stuff. It's horrible.
Well, I mean, it's number one, you weren't expecting it.
What I was telling you though about those people that in the basement of that church, I put it behind me, and it wasn't until after I was married. I got married in 1971. This happened in '68, February '68. So and I got married in '71, and I must have been married maybe 15 years or so. And there was something going on the media, the news media. They began to talk about the Vietnam War and how the Marines had committed all these atrocities in Hue, killing of the civilians. Tried to blame it on us.
15 years later, they still thought that? Oh.
Yeah, and they, I mean, to this day, the North Vietnamese government doesn't acknowledge that they committed the atrocities. Yeah. So I began to have these, it became a topic on the news, and I began to have these nightmares about the fighting in Hue. I mean, just, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and Peggy would turn the light on and say, all right, you got to tell me what's going on. So I'd recount what I was dreaming about, what the nightmares had been like. And especially in Hue, most of them were about Hue. So one of my sons, my number 2 son, Burns, called me. He said, Dad, I understand you're having nightmares. I said, yes, I am. He said, there's a priest down in Slidell, Louisiana, Father Joe Benson, and he's got the same gift that Padre Pio and St. John Vianney had. He can read your soul in confession. So I said, that sounds pretty good. I might go down there. So I loaded the kids that were still at home in the station wagon. We drove down to Slidell on Saturday, and because I had called the church and found out when confessions were, lined all the kids up, and I said, ow. One of them said, I don't need to go to, I said, you get your ass in that line, you're going to go to confession. Oh, yes, sir. So I lined them up, and we all went to confession. I was the last one. I made it what's called a general confession. Everything I could think of. During the drive down there, I was going through that in my mind. And got in the confessional, made a general confession. Lasted about 20 minutes. And finally I said, that's about all I can think of, Father. He said, are you troubled? Are you having some problems? I said, yeah, I've been having these terrible nightmares. He didn't know me from Adam's house cat. And I said, yes, Father, I've been having these terrible nightmares. He said, you mean about Vietnam? I said, yes, Father. He said, you mean about the church in Hue? I said, yeah. Matter of fact, he said, that was the Blessed Mother's hand that stopped you from throwing that hand grenade. And right then, everything I told you came back to me.
Wow.
I mean, clear as a bell.
Were you dreaming that? I mean, when you said you were having nightmares, could you remember? Was it about that church, or it was all foggy? I mean, you hadn't just told him about the church in your dreams.
Nothing.
Wow.
Nothing.
Wow.
So.
And then was that
everything?
A relief?
I never had another nightmare. I had total peace about it.
They just circled.
I mean, I can talk about it today, and it doesn't, it doesn't haunt me.
But you weren't aware at the time. You said you kind of put it out of your, like it was so deep in your mind.
I didn't want to deal with it. No. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Wow. So yeah, she was Blessed Mother was looking after me. I'm telling you.
Well, and that's where your faith really came in, because even as you're describing the urban battle and what you were doing, it was really very contrary to everything you were supposed to do, to go down those stairs without throwing the hand grenade.
That's right.
I mean, like you said.
That's what I've been doing for, a week before that, or 10 days before that.
Wow. That's a great story. Slidell. Wow.
Yeah. Joe Benson. Actually, my one of my sons is a priest. He's the youngest son, Jeremy. And he's stationed, even though he's a legionary of Christ, he's an order priest, belongs to a religious order. The bishop down there in New Orleans asked specifically for his superior to let him work in a parish down there, because Jeremy's been real active in that area, in that diocese, with youth, millennials.
Yeah.
And he's been very effective, led retreats, actually took a bunch of them on the Junipero Serra way, like you do the way across Spain, for Santiago. Well, they have one in California. It's 90 miles. So he took a group of the youngsters, teenagers and college kids, and they walked the way, and they would go from each mission, the same missions that Junipero Serra set up. And they would be hosted by the Catholic community in that particular mission church. And so the bishop heard about that, and that's when he asked Jeremy to go to this parish. And I think it's in Mandeville.
When was that? Or is it currently?
He's there now.
Oh, in Mandeville.
He's been down there about,
Mandeville's across Lake Pontchartrain, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's where his community lives in Mandeville. The name of the parish is Catherine of Siena Parish. Mm-hmm. The median age of the parishioners is 38 years old. Young parish, a lot of young people.
Yeah.
So Jeremy loves it. He says, Dad, it's got a good group of folks.
Well, that's a great going from horrible battle and away and your injury and the church, and then that's a good way to complete the story of.
Well, Father Joe Benson, what I'm saying is Jeremy went to see Joe Benson last week. He's in a retirement home.
Like this week? Like now?
Yeah, last week, not this week, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So Jeremy went to see him, and he remembers me, remembers my
That's
thing.
Beautiful.
And Father Joe is still active. He's old. He's an old guy. I mean, I'm 78. He's got to be in his 80s.
Mm-hmm. Is he in a Catholic type of retirement home?
Yeah, St. Vincent's retirement home.
Oh.
And he still gives spiritual direction to young priests.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm so glad that we're able to be sitting here and talking about it. I hope you're. I mean, there's so much that could go on, but I want to try to. Number one, give you a break, and because I know you're in touch with buddies, and like I said, there's more.
I want you to look up Charlie McMahon.
The one that I called?
Yeah, we talked.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie went through the Battle of Hue, but also he had a unique experience in as much as a call came out and they wanted volunteers to join a group called the CAP program. And the CAP, which is unique to the Marines, it's called the Combined Action Program, CAP. And the idea is to take a squad of Marines and pair them up with the fact that you were drafted meant that you were trying to get away from something. You didn't volunteer. And I really wanted to be a Marine.
So what was the reaction with your family when you joined the Marines?
Mostly supportive. And I have two younger brothers, and they were in awe of their brother, the Marine lieutenant. It was really an amazing experience. One of my brothers went to the Citadel, and the other went to the University of South Carolina. But they were always very patriotic and yeah.
So what was your training when you went for the Marines? Because you went in as an officer. I mean, you went to officer training.
Yes.
So you didn't go to Parris Island.
Oh no. The Marines trained their officer candidates at Quantico, and then they trained the young lieutenants at Quantico as well. That's the home of the Marine Corps, they call it. So
were you with other buddies? I mean, at the time when you went in, when you went into the Marines?
The guys I met at when I went into training I met there. None of the people I grew up with went in the Marine Corps. Many of them, tried to either avoid the service. Even though we went to military school, and after I finished high school, I went to the Catholic seminary, and then I went to Spring Hill after that. I don't know if it's kind of confusing.
Well, you mean that you went into the seminary and then Spring Hill? It's your life. That's how you.
That's right.
The path you followed, and it still led you back.
Yeah,
to the Marines.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, because could you have followed that path and still gone into the Marines?
No. No, and there wasn't a lot of anti-war or anti-military sentiment even in the in the seminary. It was we just it was never spoken about, not avoided, but just it was not a interest. Actually in the seminary. I wanted to be a missionary, and the field of the mission field for that order of priests, the Marist Fathers, was Oceania, which is Bougainville, Guadalcanal, all those islands the Marines had fought in World War II. And I met a missionary, and began to hear stories about what mission life was like. And he told me, Mike, you're I would encourage you during your summers to learn how to fly. So I was working for my father when I got out of the seminary. Worked a year and a half, not a year and a half, maybe 8 months for my father, and we had, it was grading and heavy equipment, so I was driving a tractor. And after I got off work at night, I would go over to Fulton County Airport and take flying lessons. So by
So
the
you
time,
did follow.
yeah, and I got a private license by the time I was finished, before I went down to Spring Hill.
So about how old would you have been then?
About 17 or 18.
Wow.
17, because I turned 18 in September, yeah.
I mean, it is different, your path, seminarian, missionary.
Uh-huh.
How in your head, since you did 2 years
Do I
of missionary,
reconcile that?
how do you reconcile that and then you're going into the Marines? Yes, I'm just,
It's all service to me.
okay.
You know, you dedicate your life to something that is greater than you. And that's how I saw the Marine Corps. It was, to me, it was just I wanted to go and be involved in this anti-communist crusade, and I felt like I needed to be really well prepared. And in my mind, the Marines were totally, I mean, it was the most noble of all the services.
Yeah, that's really
You know,
interesting.
and I felt like, you know, if I'm going to go in that environment, I want to be well trained and prepared.
So your core, your values, your core was very strong.
Yeah, it was, to me, it was,
regardless what,
yeah, and
where
it
you
was, yeah.
served.
And I felt like the Marine Corps would prepare me, and they were, you know, they were the smallest of the services, but the most, I don't want to say elite, because that's kind of, I don't like that term, but they were the most well prepared.
They sort of had to be because they were the smallest.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
were, it was concise and
And
very focused.
the Navy would always put them into environments that were, they had to rely on each other. You know, so.
So you weren't disappointed in your training? And then,
Absolutely not. Yeah, it was fun. I really enjoyed.
yeah.
I even enjoyed the OCS. To me, that was fun. You know, and people asked me, said, "Well, how did you deal with when you got to Vietnam? How did you deal with the killing of people?" And I look back on even at OCS when we'd go on these long 6-mile road, not marches, but we would double time in our boots. And every time we put our left foot down, we'd say, kill, 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 you know, because they were preparing us to go into a horrible environment and do what we were expected to do. You know, you don't think about it. So that's where the mental conditioning began. So that, you know, you all, before you ever commission, you deal with all that. How are you going to handle, you know, this experience of war? And to me, that's a great way to prepare somebody for that.
Can you remember the first time that you had to apply that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, well, most of the times I you know, kill people was using supporting arms or orchestrating the gunfire of my men. But during the fighting in Hue, I remember I was in the hospital. There was a hospital we were clearing. And I was running behind my platoon, making sure that they didn't overlook something. So as I ran down a hall of this hospital, I would look into the rooms to make sure that there was no enemy soldiers in the rooms. And I can remember coming up on this doorway, and to my left, and in the doorway, I saw a movement, and it was a young North Vietnamese soldier in uniform. He did not have his pith helmet on, but he was in uniform. The sort of dark, looked like an old Boy Scout shirt. That dark green, not dark green, but
Kind of an olive
khaki,
green?
yeah, kind of a khaki green. And he was standing up. He had hidden behind a bed, between a bed and a wall, and he was standing up, and he had an AK in his left hand, and he started to turn toward me, and I had my .45 in my hand. So instinctively, I pulled the .45 and shot him in the center of his chest. And I can remember that big 230 grain bullet hitting him in the chest and slamming him against the wall, and he just slid down with a big red streak on the wall. And the AK-47 clattered to the ground. And I just said, okay, I got him. That's all that went through my head, and I kept running.
It was automatic.
It was like shooting dove, you know, going, you just, those aren't people, they're, you know, they're enemy. That's the conditioning that the Marines put in your head. So, you know, I didn't, and it was only until recently I began to think of him, you know, and I began to pray for the repose of his soul. And I'd be at Mass and you know, just think about him, and there were several Vietnamese I saw that were had been murdered by the communists, and I prayed for them as well. But anyway, that's the first. You know, it's not a sad thing. It's just that's how they do a great job of preparing you for that.
Yeah. But when you first went over, like, because how long were you there before Hue? I mean, where were you?
I got in country. I got in country mid-November 1967. And actually, I was so excited about going. We were after we finished at basic school. We were given 20 days leave, and then we had to meet our flight to go to Westpac. They called it Western Pacific. That's Vietnam, and they flew us out of San Francisco to Okinawa, and that's where we got our shots and left our woolen clothes and sea bags and everything in storage in Okinawa. And then we got on a plane, waited for a seat on a plane. They called it down south, and which was down to Da Nang, out of Okinawa. So,
had you been out of the country before?
I've been to Europe, but I'd never been to Asia. I spent several times. I went to Italy and you know, toured Europe. Yeah. But I'd never been into Asia. It's a totally different experience.
I was going to say that between Japan and then also Da Nang, how was that as far as first impressions? I mean, apart from it, you're going to be in a battle, but temperature-wise, terrain.
Oh, temperature-wise, it was very much like here. Terrain was, it was the people and the culture, you know, and I can remember the smells of the city and just the background of the people speaking. I think the Okinawans they don't consider themselves Japanese, even though they technically they are. They're Ryukyuans. So they're very proud of their own heritage. And I can remember, I can remember that experience was, you know, it was kind of interesting, I thought.
It sounds like everything for you at that time was an adventure. That was how you just embraced every bit of it. Yeah,
and I was surprised how little everybody was. You know, and I grew up. I'm 6'3", and everybody in my family's big, and all my friends are, you know, were Northern Europeans by descent, and so to me it was like going to Disneyland or something with all the little people and speaking funny languages. It was fun though. I enjoyed Okinawa, and there was an undercurrent of excitement among all the second lieutenants that were together there, waiting for our flights down south. In the camp, it was Camp Butler. They staged us at Camp Butler, so we pretty much had the run of the place. We could, as long as we checked in at 8 o'clock every morning. With the administration people to make sure that, check on our flight, we could do anything we wanted to. So being off second lieutenants, if you want.
Were you passing officers leaving? Were you at the same time you were
recall,
going? Do you remember meeting people that were coming out of Vietnam?
I don't recall. Nothing sticks in my head about meeting somebody that
might have been deliberate.
Could be.
To keep you focused on going in.
Yeah, but we were all excited and jacked up about.
That sounds like it.
Oh yeah, it was fun. This is
ready to go.
Yeah, Yeah. So.
And then you went into Da Nang, and then did you have choices? Were you assigned or
No,
you didn't know?
I flew down to Da Nang and was processed in at 1st Marine Division. My orders read 1st Marine Division Westpac. That was it. So then once you got there, you checked in, and then the division would put you in, whatever regiment needed second lieutenants. So I was sent to the 5th Marine Regiment. And it was at Hill 55, I think, southwest of Da Nang, and that's where the regimental headquarters were. And so the 5th Marines were pretty much south of Da Nang, around to about the southwest, that quadrant. And our mission was to keep conduct operations in the jungle region between our base at An Hoa and the border with Laos.
So you were in the jungle.
Oh
in
yeah,
the bush.
yeah. And they had at Quantico, they had prepared us for jungle patrolling. I was, learned all about ambushes and how to patrol and how to look for booby traps. And the area that we were in at An Hoa was a big combat base, and that's where the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment was. That was our base, and we had some artillery there. Had a runway, airstrip that could actually handle a C-130. So that's where I learned how to apply the duties of being a rifle platoon leader. I was rifle platoon leader of 3rd Platoon Hotel Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. So we called it Hotel 325, which is 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. And it was, my company commander was a guy named Ron Christmas, George R. Christmas. He retired from the Marine Corps as a 3-star general.
Yeah.
He's a very famous general. He won the Navy Cross in Hue during the fighting.
Have you stayed in touch with him?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
All our
great.
guys from Hotel. The Navy named a ship after the Battle of Hue, USS Hue City, CG-66, which was just decommissioned last week, I think it was, or 2 weeks ago. And she was one of the she was an Aegis cruiser, and the Navy is retiring 5 Aegis cruisers a year, and then they put them in.
You're saying Aegis? What's
AEGIS. It's
Okay.
Guided Missile Cruiser.
Oh, I got you.
CG, I think they call them. AEGIS, which is it's got the missiles in the bottom that shoot up, and
Okay.
really a cool ship. So
They just retired.
they're retiring in 5 a year.
So you got in, you were there towards the end of 67 going into 68.
Yes.
So you're there, and were you immediately in combat?
Well, what they started me out was, I was, so they had to keep the shells flowing, and the only way they could go is up Route 1 with the truck convoys. So we were there to, quote, prevent that.
So after you were a couple months into this, how was your state of mind? Still?
I was bored out of my mind.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, you get addicted to the juice of adrenaline, and it just patrol after patrol, and if we got a good kill, it was great, But it was like deer hunting, You might go out deer hunting 10 times and be able to catch, shoot a deer once.
How was communications with other parts of Vietnam? Were you briefed, or were you able to keep up on what was happening?
No.
No?
We were focused on our area of operation. That was it. We might hear Bob Hope was, had a show going on in Da Nang, but other than that, this was our world was, where our battalion operated.
Yeah, but you were right into that, and then going into January.
Yeah, so we did that, patrolling along the littoral, and the night of January 30th to 31st was when TET began. And that night I was guarding a bridge with, I was with one of my squads. My platoon was assigned 2 bridges to protect, and they were exactly a kilometer apart. So I chose to go with the northern, furthest away from the company headquarters. So I stayed with the squad, the northernmost edge of our area, and then I put my right guide on Sergeant McDonald, Guy McDonald, on the bridge south of me. So he was in charge of that bridge and oversaw the squad and the supporting. Had a couple of machine guns, we had as well. And machine gun teams are separate from, they're in the weapons platoon, so they're separate from your normal platoon. So I had a couple of machine guns, and I made sure a guy had a couple. So we had sandbag fighting holes around both ends of the bridge. They weren't big bridges, they were about maybe 20 or 30 meters long. They were concrete bridges. The French had built when they occupied the area. They were great with concrete. So that night I was in the hole. Actually, I had built my the railroad from Da Nang. There was a small gauge railroad that ran from Da Nang north toward Hue, which paralleled the National Route 1. And the railroad had not been used since the French occupation because, I don't know why, but they just chose not to use the railroad then. It's running now. When I went back in '94, it was running.
Oh, okay.
But at that time it wasn't. So I put me, my radio operator, and one other Marine up on the railroad embankment. We dug into the embankment, and then I put some guys over on the bridge, the road bridge, which was about 20 meters apart. And so that was our plan was, we had those fighting positions to protect us from anybody coming up, and especially swimmers coming up and tying dynamite around or explosives around the bridge supports and blowing it. And at night we'd take grenades and throw them in the water intermittently. It's kind of fun.
I was gonna say.
And all the smell of dead fish the next morning was amazing. Anyway, so that night I was asleep I had dug a fighting position, a hole, basically a deep hole I could get in. And I was laying on the side of the hole, and I was doing radio watch with my radio operator. And I'd sleep an hour, and he'd stand up and do watch. And then we'd swap. I'd let him sleep an hour, and I'd be on watch. And about 2 o'clock in the morning on January 31st, I heard the distinctive thunk of a mortar being shot. If you hear it once, you'll always recognize it. The thunk. And I woke up. I can remember waking up and rolling into my hole because I was wrapped up in a poncho liner, sleeping in the dirt. That's why they call Marine grunts, because we're just so nasty. Just smell all the time. It's not like going home at 5 o'clock and taking a fresh shower and eating a steak and watching a little TV and then going to bed.
Get close with nature.
Oh, we do, yeah, definitely. Yeah. One with nature. Anyway, I can remember that mortar round going off, and I rolled in my hole, and it crashed pretty much near our perimeter. I'd put concertina wire around our bridge, and so I had a friend of mine, Gordon Walker, at the time. Gordy was our weapons. He was in charge of the weapons for the battalion. They had an 81 millimeter mortar section there too. And I called him on the radio and I said, "Gordy, I need help." He says, because the night before I had planned where I wanted, where I thought the enemy would come toward the bridge. So I had planned targets on all these avenues they call them avenues of approach. So I gave him those, and I had numbers for him. And I said I need. And I figured that where they were coming from, and I called for those targets. And Gordy got on the radio right away, and he got 81 millimeter mortars, and then he got a hold of the artillery people and started sending in 105 rounds. So from about 2 o'clock in the morning till sunrise, I was just had constant artillery coming in around my bridges.
Mm-hmm.
So none of our bridges were blown.
Mm-hmm.
And they tried to run across the rice paddies at us. So we opened up with our gunfire, machine guns and M16 rounds. And the next morning, when the company came in to relieve us, the skipper came up and he said, "How you doing, Mike?" And I can remember, said, "It's been a long night, Skipper." I was, and he started laughing. He said, "Yeah, it sounds like it." But they were able to engage the enemy and push them further back.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I got this Bronze Star. I got, from that night, we killed 22 guys.
Wow.
So we found 22 bodies, which is unusual. Mm-hmm. Usually when you engage the enemy, they take their wounded and they're dead. So you don't know. And I think one of the things about the Vietnam War was the politicians thought that the way you measure your success was the body count, which is stupid. But that was important. It was always how many people, and what were the results,
Well, they do that on both sides.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. So the enemy doesn't want, if they can reduce it, they don't want to give you the bragging rights.
That's why they took their all of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
But we found 22 bodies.
Wow.
So, and we held the bridges, which was important. But within hours after the skipper came up and relieved me, we got orders to hand the bridges over to another Marine unit and board trucks, and they took us up to Phi Bai. And we still didn't know what was going on, but that's the day that the TET broke out.
Mm-hmm.
So we went into Phi Bai and got a good meal that night, steak. I remember it was steak. And in the Marine Corps, the tradition is if they feed you steak and eggs, stand by, because something bad is going to happen. So we had to get on trucks the next morning and drive up the road to Phi Bai. I mean, to Hue from Phi Bai.
Mm-hmm.
Did not know what the enemy situation was. Had no clue.
Had you been in Hue before?
Never.
Never. So so this was all.
We didn't even have maps of Hue. That's and how do you call artillery, or how do you organize things if you don't have maps? We did not have maps of Hue, and we actually stopped at either an Exxon or Esso gas station just before we went into Hue. As we crossed the Phu Cam Canal, there was a gas station going into Hue, and it was went inside. We kicked the door down and went inside and got road maps of Exxon, Exxon road maps of Hue. So that's what we used in our battalion to coordinate our activities.
So you were there right in the beginning. This is right when it started.
Hue, yeah.
And how was that as your approach into Hue?
It was normally leaving, if you get in a truck, when we got in trucks and went someplace in Vietnam on the road, all the kids would come out from the villages excited about seeing the Americans go by, and they would say, "Souvenir me chop chop." And the Marines would throw them candy or whatever was in their sea ration cans, and laughing, and the kids would all dance and be all excited. Not a soul was present as we drove north. Those kilometers into Hue, nothing, no villagers, and I can remember passing an Army vehicle, U.S. Army vehicle, that had been, it was overturned, had been blown up, and there were 2 dead Army soldiers next to the truck. They've been executed, and they've been shot in the head. And they weren't. They weren't. They were killed. Execution style. We didn't stop for them. We kept going. Mm-hmm. But at that point, I said, I don't think this is going to be a fun trip, because all of my Marines were excited about going to Hue, because they'd heard stories about the beautiful Vietnamese girls and their ao dais, the graceful You know, Hue was really a very sophisticated city of 110,000 people.
A cultural center.
It was a cultural center and was the home of the Emperor of Vietnam. So the big citadel was there where his castle was, and most of the Vietnamese that had fled communism during the partition in 1954, at the end of the French War, many of them came to Hue, and they brought their money with them. And so they built a very sophisticated city. They had a university there on the south side of the river. They had the university, that hospital I talked to you about. They had the treasury was there. What else? 210 province headquarters was there. And this was all the area that we eventually fought through. Big homes, like you see in the along the French Riviera, with walls around the homes. And they all faced the Perfume River. And it was beautiful. I mean, elegant city. And this is where we had to learn how to fight in urban warfare, which is a totally different experience than the jungles we've been fighting in.
So when you made your approach, and you were talking about the Army tank and the two...
Truck. It was a truck. 6-by.
Yeah, where the soldiers were executed.
Had
there been a lot of troops, military already in Hue, or
no.
Were they had just been there?
Hue was almost an open city. There was headquarters of the 1st Arvin Division, had their headquarters in the citadel across the river, on the north side of the river. And there was a compound we called the MACV compound, which was the Military Assistance Command Vietnam. That's where the headquarters for the advisors that were serving with the Vietnamese units. They had that in the MACV compound. And when we pulled into Hue, we began to take fire. As you approach Hue from the south, you have to go across a long causeway. Flat rice, I guess they were rice paddies, but flat fields on either side of this raised causeway, much like you see when you go across the approach to Jekyll Island, you know, the raised causeway. And we began to we could see the city ahead of us. And to our northwest, there was a steeple of a Catholic church. And we began to take heavy 51 caliber machine gun fire from that church steeple. It was almost 800 yards away, so you know, the green tracers went above us. They were terrible shots. And it didn't hit any of the trucks. We were in a convoy of about, I think, 6, 7, 8 trucks, 6-bys. And as we pulled into the city, we began to take fire out of the windows on either side of the road. But still, you know, the Marines returned fire, so we actually suppressed that fire. And then we pulled into the MACV compound, which was on the south side of the Perfume River, still on Route 1. And they opened the gates, and it was like Fort Apache, the Bronx. You know, it was totally surrounded by bad guys. And we got at that point, we said, this is not going to be, you know, a vacation for us to sit on the sidewalk cafes and watch the pretty girls walk by.
Not this trip.
Not this trip. And so we got the briefing about, you know, how the enemy had come in overnight within 2 or 3 hours and occupied this city of 110,000 people. They came in out of the jungle, and their approach was totally concealed. Nobody knew about this, and the guy that was in charge of Task Force X-Ray, which was the control for all the Marine units that were covering this area, a guy named Foster LaWay, L-A, new word HUE or something like that. It's strange that he would be, you know, in control of Hue, but the guy was totally without. He was oblivious to our intelligence. Was terrible. He was totally unaware of the threat, or they just made fun of it. Said these guys couldn't do anything like that. It was a masterful stroke, because the TET offensive, there was a truce.
Yeah.
That was a truce that was broken by the communists. they made the truce and said, let's give everybody a week off, you know, to enjoy their families at TET. And that's a very big day for the Vietnamese.
That's their New Year's.
Oh.
It's equivalent. It's a national holiday.
It is.
Because I think some people don't.
It's a cultural
connect
holiday.
TET. They don't realize, but that makes sense that was a national holiday, and that they had a truce, that they were going to suspend the fighting so that everybody could.
So we honored the truce and stopped patrolling. The South Vietnamese gave furloughs to all their soldiers so they could go home and be with their families. The communists said, "Oh yeah, we're going to honor that as well," and that's when they began to infiltrate down the Ho Chi Minh Trail and stage these units that were going to go into cities. They overwhelmed within 2 hours. They overwhelmed 29 cities, and it all happened early in the morning of January 31st. Amazing coordination and amazing planning, and they had already brought in many of the weapons. You know, and concealed them inside the cities. So the soldiers that came in were dressed like civilians, you know, like people going to visit their family. So it's a terrible thing.
After the fact, did they find that they had missed warning signs, or it was just so well planned?
No,
They did
we
find
missed.
some
We
things?
ignored. Didn't miss them. We ignored the warning signs.
So you're in way though. When this is starting, and you're coming under fire. Still, that was on like the first day, second day, right when this happened.
No, the first hours.
First hours. Then I gotta keep her busy. Because I've heard that they report, this is just, you know, when they talk about the Battle of Hue, how the amount of American troops that were in the area. Did they all come in? Was it they weren't there before and they got in as soon as possible?
Yeah.
How fast was that reaction, or how fast did you have backup and reinforcements, or no?
We were under, because the big focus was Khe Sanh. If you look at the newspaper reports of that time, everybody was thinking they wanted to overwhelm Khe Sanh. So they thought, I think at least for the first few days, they thought this was a feint. And it wasn't until after the battle that we began to realize, we began to discover documents that told about the enemy order of battle. And we were out, the Marines that were sent into, you know, our battalion was on the south side of the river. 3 understrength Marine rifle companies. Battalion of Marines is 4 companies. But Echo Company was left to protect the road where we had, you know, where we had been before. They had to stay down there.
There were your replacements when you went in.
Yeah, and so the rest, Hotel, Golf, and Foxtrot Company were the 3 companies that went in to the south side of the river. They call the Vietnamese call it the New City. And had no idea how many of the enemy were and what their intentions were. And we were outnumbered. I've heard numbers of anywhere from 8 to 1 to 10 to 1. That's how much we were outnumbered.
Can you remember what was going on mentally, transitioning from you're patrolling the road and the jungle, and then you're in the urban? Because you mentioned this was a whole new
technique.
But how quickly and how were you able to shift your
gears? Do
you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Our first objective was we went into the University of Hue, and it was not occupied, but there were a few snipers in it, and we killed them pretty quick. And I can remember in the University of Hue, there was it took up a whole block, and there was a courtyard in the middle. And we went in and looked around, and many of my Marines had never, probably didn't even finish high school. So I can remember one Marine, you know, he must have been from Alabama or something. He said, "Hey, Lieutenant, look what I found. I found a little telescope." And it was a, you know, what do you call
Microscope.
microscope. And I said, "Don't look at the sun with that thing. It'll burn your eyes out." Because he was looking all around, and you know, they were just amazed at the chemistry lab and all that stuff. I said, "Fellas, we're here to fight a war, not walk around and see what's, you know, what a university looks like." So I got them focused on that. And the first, and the enemy was right across the street. And I said, "We got to go over there and take that building." So the first time we just all ran across the street. You know, we threw some smoke in the you know, smoke in the street, and under the cover of the smoke, we ran across the street. And the enemy was down about 2 blocks away, and they had a machine gun set up. So they figured out what we were doing very quickly, and then began to fire that machine gun down the street, what we call grazing fire, which is knee high. So as you ran through it, it was like running through water, but there were bullets, and then, you know, you'd get hit in the knees, and you'd fall down into the machine gun fire. So we said, well, that doesn't work. So that, you know, you file that away. And finally somebody came up with the idea. We had our 106 recoilless rifles mounted on a mule, which was a small flatbed. You know what that is?
That you pull behind it like a
You ride it behind it. You have a steering wheel, and you can actually sit in it and drive it like a little Jeep, but it's flatbed. But you can also flip the steering wheel around and crawl behind it and work the throttle and the brakes and everything by hand. So what we did was we took that mounted mule with a 106 and drove it into the University Way, and then put it on the front steps and cranked it off, and it shot down the street where we saw that machine gun was, and it hit in, and we fired a white phosphorus round, not explosive round, and it hit down where the machine gun was and just turned the whole building into flame. It was beautiful. and the guy stopped shooting, obviously. But we began to learn you don't cross the street as a gaggle all together. You run across, set 2 or 3 guys across, so it's a whole different pattern. And so it took us about 6 days to move 6 blocks in this fighting.
6 days to move 6
6
blocks.
blocks.
So the enemy was waiting on you. I mean, they
were there.
They knew you were coming. They were just waiting.
Oh yeah.
And you were trying not to be sitting ducks.
And I told you the buildings all had walls around them. The homes did. And so you don't just open the front gate and walk through into the courtyard.
Is there a number going there?
So what we would do is we would take a 40-pound sack of C4. It came in a canvas bag. Put a fuse in it, a blasting cap and a fuse, and take 2 sticks and tie them together and lean them up against the wall, and then hang the bag of C4 down from a rope so it was laying against the base of the wall, and crank that 40 pounds of explosives off and just blow the wall down. And and then we'd run through in the dust and all the confusion and everything, and that's how we would access
So you were
the
just coming up
courtyard.
with these little techniques on the fly.
So that's how we were able to get into the yards, and I would send 15. By this time I was down to about 30 or effective guys. So I'd send most of my Marines around inside the courtyard, around the yard, around the building, and to make sure that there weren't any snipers. And that was our biggest problem. And we had snipers that would shoot at us. And then I'd send a fire team into the buildings to clear the buildings, because they knew each other's voices. They knew how each other reacted under the stress of combat. We ran through a tremendous amount of hand grenades.
Did you lose any of your men?
Yeah, I went into the city with 65 Marines. I had a reinforced platoon. I think I had some gun teams with me. I even had a sniper team with me. And And so by the 6th day or 7th day, I was down to 20 affected.
Wow.
Now they
Due
weren't
to
killed. They were
wounded and
yeah,
out of
wounded
action.
mostly.
So what about civilians?
They left. They had left. They fled when the communists came in. Because the communists, what they did was, at the beginning of Hue, that night of January 31st, they had compiled lists of people that what was the term they used? They would be reactionary. They would not accept the communist dialectic. Because they had seen it, or they were too well educated to accept it. So those people that were on the list, they knew exactly where they slept. And the communist agents would go into their houses and drag them out of their beds. And these were the people that they marched out west of the city to be judged. And the ones that refused judgment, that resisted, were summarily executed in their house or in the street in front of their house.
This happened through the night.
The night of January 31st, before we even got there. So, yeah, and I found this out afterwards. But what had happened was they had infiltrated the neighborhood, and many of their neighbors were sympathetic to the communists, or they'd been blackmailed into cooperating. And also the Buddhists at that time had tried to not overthrow, but had protested against Diem. This is in maybe a year before this happened. And they had been persecuted by the Diem regime, and they subsequently joined the communists. So they were natives. They'd grown up in Hue, so they knew many of the people. So the communists had very extensive lists of people that they had determined would not be sympathetic to their occupation of and overthrow of the South Vietnamese government.
Did they also compensate? Were people paid to turn to help the communists?
I don't think so. I think they were blackmailed or threatened. The communists were very ham-handed. They weren't very sophisticated with how they did this. But they would find out something bad about somebody and say, well, I'm going to tell your wife that you did this, or I'm going to tell the government you did this, or I'm going to tell the police you did this. So
scare, whatever they could do to scare them.
Yeah, yeah.
So this was really intense fighting that you all were engaged in. And was it constant, or it didn't let up?
Constant, yeah.
For 6 days. And
Well, the battle was 26 days,
Yeah.
so we were constantly in contact with that's the whole deal in this kind of fighting. You don't want to let the enemy, you don't want to lose sight of the enemy. You want to keep up the pressure on them. So that's what we did. Yeah.
How were you getting supplies? Were coming in and...
The Navy was bringing up supplies up the Perfume River in landing craft.
Oh, okay.
And we actually had a boat ramp, or an area that was designated right near the MacB compound, where there was a big metal girder bridge that went across the river, and just next to it there was an area that was we called it the LCU, Landing Craft Utility Ramp, and that's where the landing ships would come up and offload.
Were the MacV, they there, or had they left for the holiday?
They were Australians
there?
and South Koreans and Americans.
Joint,
They were all the advisors that were working with the South Vietnamese government, the military.
But they were caught up in the battle. I mean, they're now in it.
Yeah, but they weren't active. It was our job to clear the city. So that's how we got the supplies.
Okay.
And our gunnery sergeant, a Marine infantry company, doesn't have its own rolling stock or its own trucks, or we didn't even have jeeps. I think that we didn't have anything. So our gunny, Frank Thomas, somehow had identified members of young Marines that were in our company that had been encouraged to join the Marine Corps or go to jail. I mean, that was a practice back then. Given the option, you know, say, oh, well, I want to be a Marine. I'd rather do that than sit in a jail somewhere. And some of these kids had been active in stealing cars, you know, in their civilian occupation. So many of the civilians that had fled this area that we were in had wealthy, you know, they were pretty wealthy, so they had automobiles, modern automobiles. I can remember we got a hold of several Jeeps, you know, and Gunny got the guys to hotwire these vehicles, and that was our resupply from the LCU ramp.
So you actually took advantage of that
We did.
skill.
Yeah.
That's priceless.
Uh-huh.
Well,
And I can remember the skipper, Ron Christmas, said, Mike, I want you to, this is as we got up to the edge of the Phu Cam Canal, and the skipper said, Mike, I want you to blow a certain bridge because the enemy's crossing over this bridge at night on the Phu Cam Canal. And again, they were those concrete bridges the French built. And so I must have slept through that class at Quantico. I didn't know how to blow up concrete bridges. You know, we didn't really have the wherewithal to do it. And if I really wanted to do it right, I'd have to get out and get under the bridge, and you know, the enemy was shooting machine guns at us. So what I did was I packed a Jeep Wagoneer that we hot-wired somewhere. I don't know where we got it, with as much C4 explosive as I could find. You know, figured at least that'll, you know, do something anyway. And so we pushed it out. We drove it out to the middle of the bridge, and got out and crawled back because we were taking fire. And cranked off that charge, and it must have been I probably had 250 rounds of C4 in it. And I said, fire in the hole. Everybody said, oh, fire in the hole. Cranked it off and it blew up. And all it did was turn there was a black mark on the bridge. And I can remember seeing wheels and, you know, parts, engine motors and everything else went up in the air.
did nothing to destroy the bridge.
Did not destroy the bridge.
Oh.
So finally I got on I used my artillery calling skills and started, you know, just got artillery rounds to blow it
Did you
up.
have air power, air coverage?
No, we were too close. What's unique about that type fighting is you can't use all your supporting arms. And so everything was what we call direct fire. So this is David,
Hello,
my grandson
David.
David.
Hi, David. I'll have to
Come here and say hello.
You can. I'll include you. My name is Susan.
How you
Your
doing?
grandfather's being interviewed. You find it interesting? Yeah. Good.
David is 6.
David is 6
No.
years old.
7.
Oh
you're 7.
dear! Oh my goodness gracious!
My birthday was a few months ago.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So
Well, a late happy birthday
this is
to you.
he's in first grade at St. John Bosco Academy.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So
Well, when we get at the end, I want to get a picture with you. We'll get a group picture. How about that? And whatever your brothers and sisters are here,
yeah.
everybody can get in it. So
Be
you can
careful you
listen.
don't
Yeah, don't.
trip
Yeah, be
over that.
careful.
Why don't you go outside and wait outside because we're trying to talk, okay?
Oh,
Hey, David, I love you.
Love you too.
Priceless.
So, he's a pistol ball. He wants to be a priest.
Really?
Yeah, that's what
Oh.
he says.
That's, I kind of far from that. But, I don't know, like when you're talking now and you're describing it, are you okay? Can you remember it now?
Oh, yeah.
When you're,
I can even smell it.
when you start.
No. He wanted to use my computer.
Oh.
That's why he was out here. The computer's sitting over here.
Oh, because he's taking a.
He likes to look at,
he's a
cartoons and stuff on it.
strategic point. No, that's right. Because number one, because we are sitting here today, 2022,
Yeah.
and your family and all these things that you're able to really enjoy, which is like you said, there's a reason for something. You were able to serve.
Right.
But it is listening to you talk. It's really important. It's as I hear you going through it, be able to remember it, talking about your men, it's still hard for as a civilian, or even when is how everything was so fluid. How you were able, I mean, it wasn't like something stopped and you were able to, everything, like stop, turn the movie off or put it on pause and plan. You were constantly living it, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, like you said, you couldn't get air power in, so you couldn't use all your backup. You were keeping up with the men and who was wounded and taking care of them, but how, you're now moving through an urban area that you weren't even familiar with. I mean, so I'm just trying to understand, as a leader, you're responsible for orchestrating the movement of the men, and there's other things happening. But I guess you're young, and how that was going through your head. How were you constantly?
I think it was the training I had received at Quantico. I mean, the training we had was really, really good.
Okay, that's important.
You know, it taught you how to think and how to break down an issue, how to deal with situational awareness.
Under stress.
And how to process it under stress.
Yeah. But it's still different when you're in it. I mean, you know, it's I know you go through it, but you're literally, this was pretty early on in your time in Vietnam. But it went well. I mean, you survived it because we're sitting here today.
Yeah.
But so I'm just trying to, that's why it's really interesting to hear how you moved through the city and how things developed, because you're now getting into a, extended length of time.
Yeah. Well, this was the, like I say, it took us 6 days. The first 6 days, we were in constant contact with the enemy.
Yeah.
And room to room. So you're looking the guy in the face when you shoot him out. I told you about shooting that young North Vietnamese soldier. And I just, I don't know, it's hard to explain how I made that transition. But all my men did the same thing. I think working together and the preparation prior to going into Hue really helped us. We were a very tight-knit group.
Yeah, that had to have been. You had to have been.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have survived without that.
No. And one thing that was really funny was we would go into these homes, and most of my men had never seen the elegance of these homes, And our meals consisted of, they'd give us a little box called meal ready to eat or something like MREs. But they were a little brown cardboard box, and there was a main meal, like a can of beans and franks, and then a can of crackers, another can of some kind of fruit, and then a package that contained a little package of toilet paper, waterproof matches or matches, a box of 4 cigarettes, chewing gum, usually chiclets or some kind of like that. I guess that's about all. But that was a day's worth of food. So they would, that was a special part of the day, and the kids, the Marines would trade, and I've got some crackers and cheese here. Who wants to swap it for some pound cake? Pound cake was the most desired thing, or canned peaches. Canned peaches again were a big deal. So wherever we stopped, what they'd do is they'd take this box, open it up, and stick it in a sock, and tie the end of the sock, and then tie it to the back of their pack. We didn't have these rucksacks the Army had. We had the World War II era knapsacks. So we'd get to some place and settle in, like we'd go to somebody's home, and I never will forget walking into the living room of one of these elegant French homes, or Vietnamese homes, and here's these guys, they would take and open the can, like a cracker can, and make holes on the bottom so the air could come in, and then put a little square of C4 in it, and then put the can on top they wanted to cook, and ignite the C4, and then put the can on there, and it burned real fast, so within just a couple of minutes, they had a hot can
Heat up their food.
of beans and franks, you know, and they're sitting there eating. And they had put the little stove on an oriental carpet. And I remember walking into this living room, you know, elegant, you know, a lot of crystal and stuff, and this oriental carpet on the floor. And I started to scold them because my grandmother she had a big oriental carpet in her home. And I'd come in, she'd always say, wipe your feet or take your shoes off or don't walk on the carpet, because it was her pride and joy. And I started to scold these Marines, you know, after they'd been fighting for like 4 days. And, I bit my tongue and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. These guys, you know, have done a massive job, just an awesome job.
Wow.
But that was so funny. The irony of that.
And also, yeah, it probably was almost surrealistic to have the setting,
Oh.
this elegant setting, and
Yeah.
you're fighting in it.
Yeah, yeah. And and another thing was they had actually had toilets, regular, you know, European style toilets, and no water running. So the guys would do their business in the toilet and not flush, you know. And so and that was an instinct of mine. You forgot to flush the toilet, Lieutenant. There's no water.
Oh, but probably just a bit. Probably felt like a bit of some convenience.
It was surreal.
Surreal,
like you
yes.
said. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's like, yeah, it would be a crazy setting. So.
But these were my guys, and I took care of them, and that was the deal. And we were a good team.
It sounded like you clicked, like you were in sync with each other. So you totally, and then you kept moving on. How were you? So I mean, with the buildings, I mean, because you had there were other Marines going into all
there
over,
was,
so you were just moving
hotel company,
together.
golf,
every,
and Fox.
Okay,
We were running parallel to each other. What we'd do is we'd cross the street and then fight through a block. And typically, each company would have its own block. It was a big city, you know, and very sophisticated. Much different than the little grass huts that we had fought in down around Anwa. So.
You hit your stride. When was it that you went to the church?
Oh, February 11th. And we fought up to the edge of this block, and we were hiding behind the wall, and the company commander said, all right, we want to assault across the street into the next block. So I had been given a position that my objective was right in front of me. I looked over the wall, and there was this Catholic church. Now, mind you, I had been a seminarian, grew up Catholic, you know, and altar boy and all that, so I kind of felt funny going into the Catholic church to kill people, you know. And again, it was, you know, by this time we never saw any civilians that were alive. All the civilians we saw were dead in the street, and by this time the pigs had come in out of the countryside and they were eating the bodies. So the stench was incredible. Yeah, I mean, it's just...
People don't imagine that part, you know? No. One thing to see a dead body, but then to have...
So we went into the city on the 2nd. This was the 11th. So we had just fought out, you know, out to the edge of the city. And I got... so I felt uncomfortable when I got the order to attack the church. But like a good Marine officer, I said, yes, sir. And but this time I was down to about 20 effective. I think I told you that really went through a lot of guys got wounded with shrapnel. So we blew the wall down around the church, and I sent about 15 of my Marines checking out for snipers and spider holes. And I ran into the back end of the church, into the entrance of the church with a fire team. And the fire team ran up to the altar. Now this is after how many days of continuous combat? You know, getting sleep. You're just
9
working
days
on.
Almost.
You're working on training. You're like a machine. And adrenaline. And so I'm standing there back in the narthex of the church, and my guys are up there working behind the altar, checking the confessionals and looking in the pews, shouting back and forth. And I look over my shoulder, and there's a doorway. And the only person to send was me. I said, well, I got to check this out. Because what the communists would do is they'd hide in an unsuspecting place and then get behind you and shoot you. So didn't want that to happen. So I went over and checked the doorway out, and there was a stairwell going under the church, going down. And it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, overcast, no electricity, obviously. I didn't flick the lights on. And I started down the stairs into the gloom, into the dark. And I noticed that the stairs went down, and there was a landing, and then the stairwell turned to the right, which I assume was probably the basement or the crypt under the church. And just before I got to the landing, I put my M16 under my arm, and I think I put it on safe. And I reached into my flak jacket pocket and pulled out an M26 hand grenade, held it in my hand, stuck my finger, my left pointer finger, into the ring, and began to ease flattened the cotter key out, began to ease that pin out. And out of the dark, a hand reaches out and lays on top of my hand. Now, I was so exhausted, and I should have freaked out.
Yeah.
But I was peaceful, and I knew deep inside of me that I was supposed to safe that grenade. So I pushed the pin back in, flattened the cotter key back, stuck it back in my flak jacket pocket, stepped down to the landing. I don't even think I took my M16 off safe. Turned and looked down the stairs, sort of in the back of my mind, half expecting a blast of AK-47 rounds coming up the stairwell at me. There in the dark and gloom of that basement, that crypt, were vigil lights that were lit, little tiny lights. And in the glow of the vigil lights were the faces of women and children saying the rosary. And they, in that basement. And even then, it didn't register with me. And I told them in my broken Vietnamese, Lai Dai, and I led them back up the stairs, because if I had sent them up ahead of me, my Marines would have shot them. I led them up, assigned one of my corporals to make sure they got back to the platoon of South Vietnamese soldiers that had been, their mission was to protect the villages. So they would build a compound in these villages and provide security for the people in the village. Because the communists would send in agents at night to terrorize the people, like the mafia. They worked a lot like like gangsters, and so this cap unit, cap Marines would go out on patrol with these South Vietnamese soldiers, and they'd get intelligence. Many of them learned Vietnamese. I don't know if Charlie speaks Vietnamese, but they would provide intelligence for what the enemy was doing, where they were moving and stuff, and protect the villagers and develop relationships with the villagers, which was really good. And that technique, or that whole concept, went back to when the Marines were in Central America during the Banana Wars. They the Marines worked in Haiti and Nicaragua. It was a kind of a neat concept. I don't think any other service. The closest thing the Army did was they had the Special Forces, but it was a totally different concept.
Yeah.
This was
more humanitarian, or
well, it was more. The basis for them being there was not an outpost that was built out in the remote area of some territory. The basis for them was an established village, with the village chief and all that stuff. So they came in.
Elders.
Yeah, they came in as a support and subordinate to the village chief.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the CAP program was really, really good.
Charlie's up in Pennsylvania. Yeah.
And he just I talked to him, and I think you've reached out to him.
I spoke to him. I think was before. I called him, I think September 6th, right before I went to Dallas.
Okay.
We had a long conversation, and he talked to me about his trips to Vietnam.
We went back to Vietnam together.
Right.
In August of '94. So, and we stayed in touch. Father Jeremy has been over to their house and visited, and my one of my oldest grandson, Andrew, he's working in Philadelphia as a missionary with the Catholic Church. He's given a year to work with the Catholic community, and what they do is they help the homeless people there. So he's serving the homeless people. I said, call Charlie. So he called Charlie, and I think they're going to get together. So.
Well, and then Charlie's involved with a Facebook group of
Vietnam vets. Yeah.
Vietnam vets.
Yeah.
To stay in touch.
But he's also very active in the Camp Marine program. They have a group now that.
Oh, ongoing, but are staying in touch.
Yeah, and they're all Marines that had worked the CAP program, which is It's a fascinating concept. The Marines couldn't use the CAP unit, the CAP program, in I don't know, for some reason in Afghanistan it wouldn't work among the Muslims, because they have the tribal.
Yeah.
It's a whole different mindset, I guess.
Yeah.
But the CAP program was very effective in Vietnam.
Yeah, no, I will definitely. I wish I could. I don't know if I can physically get to Pennsylvania, which would be the ideal thing.
Well, he gets around. He just got back from Berlin.
Oh.
He went to, after he got out of the Marine Corps, he got an engineering degree, and he went to work for Amtrak. So he's kind of he's a sort of a guru of the locomotives and trains.
You may know Amtrak ends in Sanford, Florida.
Oh, is that right?
It was a railroad. It was Navy and a railroad town, so I'm familiar with that.
Yeah.
Would you want to? Because I want to get on it. I wanted you to say something just about like current times, but I know I don't know if the children are here at all. I can even just do a photo, because when you got out of the Marines, and do you want to say something about that, or would you like to wait for a follow-up?
No, I'd be glad to.
Just give a little something
Yeah.
about things.
I'm not sure where the kids went. They had Minnie had to go to choir.
Oh, okay.
And it could be that the young ones went.
Well, you can even do that. I would love to have a group photo, but one of them, was it David? He already kind of snuck it. He made a guest appearance.
He wanted to take my computer.
I know, but I will have to. I'll put his name down because
David Francis Reda, Rueda. Yeah, his daddy is Francisco Reda. He's the Coca-Cola executive
Okay.
from Bogota. Good guy. Francisco Jose Reda.
Redda.
Rueda. Rueda.
Rueda. Rueda. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, he's in finance with Coke.
So kind of how, if I know you can't. It's just so much. It's fascinating, but how you got out, and then and also just. Or you could summarize, because for somebody listening to this, or your grandkids, or anyone, you talk the connection, how that carried on, like your experience there. How do you look at things now? I mean, do you look back? Do you reflect back any differently, or as far as your service and how you felt about leadership, and then also how do you now currently relate to, for example, young veterans that have just finished our 20-year, the Afghan Iraq.
All right. Well, let me tell you what happened after I came home. My last, I got orders out of the bush. We called it. I spent my first 8 months in Vietnam were in the bush with a rifle company, and then I went to. I was assigned to go up to 1st Marine Division headquarters, and I worked for G2, the intelligence section, and I was a briefing officer for the general, the commanding general. Every morning I'd give him the briefing about what went on the previous day. That was fun. I liked that. It was very easy duty, and I actually lived in a hooch, they call it, with 4 other young Marine officers. We had a Vietnamese lady that came in and did our laundry, and we had clean sheets. 3 squares a day, and it was really, really being around all the people that had not been grunts was interesting, you know. Then when I came home, was assigned to Camp Lejeune with the 2nd Marine Division. One thing though, people say, well, how did you deal with the possibility of not coming back? And I just resigned myself that I wasn't going to survive this experience, and just accepted it. You know, it didn't trouble me or anything else. I said, this is my time. So I can remember on the flight home back to the States, back to Connus, I was kind of disappointed. I said, I'm going home now. I was confused. What do I do next? So I got home, and I had no clue about the anti-war movement. But our country had flipped after the TET offensive, and people were totally against us. And I can remember getting back to Atlanta, walking down Peachtree Street, and some hippie, I'd never seen hippie. Well, before I went overseas, we went to Haight-Ashbury. A bunch of lieutenants went to Haight-Ashbury. It was like going to the zoo. You know, all these kids were laying around drunk, not drunk, but doped up. Stoned, yeah. You know, guys with long hair, just filthy looking people. Animals almost. And it was kind of bewildering, but it was like going to the zoo, you know, say, oh, okay, whatever. But then I got home and seeing how much in that 1 year of '68, how much our country had flipped. From supporting people saying thank you for your service and all that, to spitting. I got spat upon in my uniform. I can remember going to the Piedmont Driving Club here in Atlanta, because I had dated several girls that were making their debuts. And walking across the dance floor, this is a Christmas of '68, and I was wearing my Marine officer dress blues and my medals. I was really proud of it, you know, what I'd done. And that's a hell of a uniform, really a good looking uniform. And expecting a lot of oohs and ahs, and, you know, and I got over to where the girls were across the dance floor that I'd known, dated, and they turned their backs on me, they ignored me. And I was just, I wasn't humiliated, I was crestfallen. I said, confused, what's all this about? And I walked back and, you know, left, and I walked through a group of mothers, and they'd all been brides during World War II, so they had a whole different perspective on the military. And they fawned over me, and there was a lady named Yolande Gwynn, who was the social writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And she was there to write an article about this particular girl's debut, you know, party.
Debutante.
And she said, who are you? And I said, I'm Michael Lambert, you know, from Buckhead, and just got back from Vietnam. She said, you look very handsome in a uniform. Well, thank you very much. And the next day when the paper came out and the article about the debut party, there was a section about this handsome young Marine officer.
You got a little attention.
A little irony, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, sad,
but
sad.
for the most
I'm
part,
sorry.
I didn't wear my uniform, and I could tell people didn't want to talk about my experience in Vietnam. So the only people that wanted to know about it was my family. So it was just
rough.
You know, it was sad. I wasn't angry, because I had experienced it. I had an opportunity to be with some awesome men. And then I went back to Camp Lejeune after that Christmas of '68, and spent, I got out of the Marine Corps June of '70. I was released from active duty and stayed in the reserves until June of '72. And that's when I got out as a captain. But I really enjoyed my time with the Marines. It's a fine unit, awesome group of men. I'd do it again.
You still stay involved.
Huh?
You're still involved with your Marines.
Yeah, I would do it again.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's necessary for a young man to test his mettle somehow. You know, I think it gives you a sense of who you are.
Yeah.
And and I try to impart that to my grandsons. I've got, I don't know how many, 16 or 17 grandsons. 28 grandchildren altogether.
Yeah, that's what I mean, I won't ask you to name all of them. You got 28 grandchildren.
Uh-huh.
That's amazing.
We had 6 children.
Okay, name your 6 children. Just
Michael
I know
is
you-
the oldest. He went to the Naval Academy, class of 95.
Uh-huh.
Burns, class of 98 at the Naval Academy. Sarah, who's here, she's David's mama. She has 6 children. Then there's, let's see, Michael, Burns, Sarah. Jonathan, he lives down in Marietta, and they're expecting their number 5, married to Kristen. Hang on. Michael, Burns, Sarah, John, Jeremy, who's Father Jeremy down in Louisiana, and then Megan and Ben McMillan. They live in Sharpsburg.
That's
And
beautiful.
Burns lives out on the West Coast in San Diego. We're hoping he'll come back.
Uh-huh.
You know, get out of.
Well, you're very blessed.
Oh, it's really
You're
cool.
very blessed.
Yeah.
Your life. I mean, what you did for others, and now, I mean, what can be better than having
Yeah.
all those
Yeah.
beautiful children and
Well,
your kids?
Sarah and Francisco, we were actually, Peggy and I was in fundraising. Started out in the magazine printing business.
Okay.
After I got out of the Marine Corps, I was going to graduate school at Georgia State. And started, a family friend owned a printing plant here in Atlanta. And he was printing Time magazine, People, Sports Illustrated, a lot of long run magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a plant out in Fulton Industrial area, out near Six Flags. And so he said, what are your plans? Because he and his wife gave me a coming home party, which is very unusual.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to babysit for their kids. They lived on the same street between Peggy and I, Wood Valley Road in Buckhead. So he said, what are your plans? I said, I don't know. I was thinking, I spent the summer of 1970 after I got out of the Marine Corps with a friend of mine I'd gone through Quantico with, and he had the same. He said, what do we do? You know, we're bewildered. We went over to Europe and spent 2 months in Europe just with a rental car that we picked up in Trier, Germany, and drove around Europe. Just, you know, we had our release pay, and just it was awesome. You know, we had a great time. And when I got back, he said, in Paris, I met some American soldiers, Marines, that had joined the after their time in Vietnam, and when they got out, they joined the French Foreign Legion, and they were fighting communists down in Chad.
Wow.
So I said, that might be kind of fun. So when I got back, I said, you know, he said, what are your plans? I said, I'm thinking about maybe joining the French Foreign Legion and going down to Chad and killing some communists. And he said, he didn't say that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. He said, oh, well, that's, you know, why don't you come out and take a look at my printing plant? And I said, okay. So we were down at Mule and Brink's Saloon down. He was entertaining some customers from Time in underground Atlanta. And I was down I had just gotten off work. I was working at Rich's part-time and selling clothes. So I'm drinking some beer, and then I was going to drive home. And he said, yeah, come out tomorrow morning and take a look. So I you know, spit shine my shoes and got a starch shirt on and went out to the plant in Fulton Industrial and walked around the plant. I was fascinated with this big machinery. The presses were as big as locomotives, you know, big 2,000-pound rolls of paper. They were printing Time magazine that day.
Yeah,
And
wow.
I loved it, you know, because I'd grown up around
Yeah.
machinery in our business, family business. So when we finished the tour, after walking me through, he said, what do you think? I said, it's fascinating. He said, how would you like to learn how to be a printer? Go to work for me. I'd like to have you. I said, I'd love to. He said, well, you can start in the morning. I said, oh? He said, yeah, show up here at midnight, but don't wear those clothes. So I started on the midnight shift as an apprentice in the press room,
And
wiping oil off the rollers, you know.
so Chad and the French Foreign Legion
Totally, you know,
went the other way.
went the other way.
So you also need to mention your wife's name. You just mentioned Peggy.
Yeah, Margaret Starr Lambert. Wait,
Okay.
yeah.
And you all met when you got back. You
No,
didn't
no,
meet.
I knew her as a little girl.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I
Her-
want you to.
her oldest
you
brother-
talked about the grandkids, so I just feel like you've got to get Peggy in there.
Her oldest brother David and I went to went to Christ the King grade school together.
Okay.
We were actually in the same, our mothers had the same carpool. This was before they had buses. So they carpooled us to school. And so David and I had been friends since grade school. And they had the first black and white TV on the street. So after school, all the kids, and there were a lot of kids on our street, we'd go over to their house, the Stars house, on Wood Valley Road, and watch the Mickey Mouse Club on black and white TV. You know, and all the boys were in love with Annette Funicello. She was just heartthrob. So I stayed sort of in touch. Peggy's father was my scoutmaster, and so I knew the family. My dad and my father-in-law knew each other. And then I went off to the seminary, and pretty much David and I lost contact. He went to Georgia Tech, and got a commission in the Navy through the Navy ROTC. And then I got out of the Marine Corps, and I was working in the printing business, and had a little apartment over on Roswell Road near Wyuka. And not dating anybody, because I was just back from over, I didn't know anybody, and that wasn't, I was trying to get my life started. So David calls me on the phone. He said, he called me Lammy. I hated that. He said, Lammy, I'm in town. He was still in the Navy. And he said, I got a date with your cousin, Mary Ann. We're going to go down to the Racket Club and go dancing. Racket Club was down right near Piedmont Hospital off Peachtree. They always had on the weekend they had a dance orchestra or whatever. He said, you want to go? Get a date and come on. I said, I don't know anybody. I have nobody. And I'm just back in Atlanta after many years. He said, well, my sister is here. She's working in the financial district up in New York, in Manhattan. But she came home for some time. And she doesn't know anybody. She's in the same situation. And today's her birthday. I said to myself, she doesn't have a date on her birthday? But anyway, I said, yeah, hook me up. So it was sort of a blind date, but I had known her as the bratty 5-year-old kid sister that used to get tattletale on me all the time. We used to, David and I we'd steal cigarettes from his parents and go out in the playhouse and smoke cigarettes. And remember one time she comes out and said, what are you doing out here? And I said, we're smoking. We have a club. You want to join? Yeah, because I knew she was going to tattletale on me. So I said, here, we'll give you a cigarette. So 5-year-olds. She got sick as a dog. She went in and told her mother that Michael Lambert gave her a cigarette. Her mother called my mother. And that night I got a belt whipping, for
that's so funny.
being so mean.
And now you're married.
Anyway, so we went dancing that night with David and Mary Ann. And I can remember when she walked through the door. I hadn't seen her since she was like 5 or 6 years old. She walks through the door, and I was like, I don't know if you've ever been to a slaughterhouse, but what they do is they hit the animals in the head with a hammer and stun them, and then put them in the conveyor belt. I was like one of those stunned animals. Like, I opened the door, and here's this blonde, and I looked at her, and something happened inside my heart.
Oh.
And I told her, subsequently I said, I knew you were the one. And marriage or any kind of relationship was the furthest thing in my mind. But it was I got stunned, yeah. We got married 56 days later.
Wow.
We got married. I called up Monsignor McDonough, who was a family friend. He and my father used to drink on the weekends together. And he was he was pastor of Holy Spirit at the time. And I said, I want to get married. He said, oh, okay. Who? I said, Peggy Starr. He said, oh, I know Peggy. I said, we're supposed to do that pre-Cana thing, right? He said, yeah, you're supposed to do that. He said, come on by. So we made an appointment and went by and spent the time mostly talking about our families with him, because I had been one of his altar boys. He knew Peggy's family and he knew her. So that was our pre-K and stuff. And then we got married. We couldn't find a place to get married because you got to reserve them months ahead of time. So I called Vince Brennan, who was out at Marist, out there at Ashford Dunwoody, and I said, Vince, and I knew it from when I was in seminary, and I said, I need a place to get married. Can we use y'all's chapel? He said, yeah, sure. So we got married at the Marist Chapel. I don't think anybody's ever been married since there.
What was the date of your?
August 28th, 1971. I remember that date. And July 8th, 1971 was our first date.
And you've been married now?
51 years.
Congratulations.
Yeah, yeah.
Life is good for you.
It is.
That's great. I mean, yeah.
6 kids and 28 grandchildren. It's busy.
Yeah.
I was up in Connecticut. Peggy and I were up in Connecticut. I was doing fundraising up there for the Legionaries of Christ. And no, for National Catholic, what is it? Anyway, National Catholic Register, which is the Legionaries of Christ. At the time, they owned it. EWTN owns it now, but back then it was owned by the Legionaries. So I was doing the fundraising for them because I had been in sales for many years, in corporate sales, and I really enjoyed, sales. So I get, we start to come. Let's see. We start to come back home, and I felt like it's time to come home. All my kids were starting to say, Dad, you need to come home. We need to be around you. I said, okay. So I made a deal. I could do the fundraising headquartered here in Atlanta.
Okay.
And Sarah found out about it. She says, Dad, when you come down, and I know you're going to be looking for a condo, why don't you stay with Francisco and I and the kids until you find something you want? I said, okay, it'd be fun. And it's been 11 years ago.
That's great.
It's the most amazing thing to be part of this family.
That's great.
Yeah.
And you now have a new career? Uber
for my grandchildren, yeah. I'm Uber and Grandpa. I mean, that's wonderful.
You can tell they adore you, and I think it's mutual. I think that's great, and it's just a wonderful way for you to. I mean, this setting's gorgeous. You got the kids. It's just couldn't wish anything better for me. There's so many vets that are suffering and lonely and just and that's part what I do and with the people that we meet, that some people need to get connections, and I try to tell people also that because we have learned so much more about the Vietnam War differently. I had one Marine vet say it was never too late for somebody to say thank you or to acknowledge them, and so do you feel the same way? Or
I feel like I've had all that reinforcement within my family. I've gotten it from within my family. But I make a point of I'll see some guy that's got a Vietnam service shirt on or something, and I'll say, welcome home. That's pretty much the thing you say. But then you see somebody else that's in service. For instance, if I see some guy that's a veteran, I'll say, thank you for your service. Or if I see a guy that's a policeman or a fireman, I'll make a point of stopping and saying thank you for your service. Yeah,
exactly. Well, the welcome home, that was the words that Jim Bly that I interviewed. He was one of the first people I interviewed in 2017, Vietnam War, and he was in the battle Meade
River.
Meade River, first he was lieutenant, that was something. I mean, he related. I think he was in Washington D.C. at the Vietnam Memorial.
Right.
And he said he went there, to honor fallen Marines and his fellows.
Uh-huh.
And there were some children that were drawing, that they were there. They had drawn folk pictures, colored pictures to give to the veterans.
Oh, yeah.
And came up to him, and then one of the little girl or someone said, "Welcome home." And he said that just melted him.
Oh my
But
gosh!
he said it felt just soothing. So I do tell people to go ahead and
say
it and ask, not be afraid, because it's never too late. And everyone right now, everybody's helping each other, and there's people that support veterans that are not a veteran, but they've, somebody like me or your kids that have grown up in a military family or a Navy family, and you just understand there's a difference of that support. So that's great that you do it, and I just thank you for taking the time for this. So
thank you
I'll see. I hope we're going to wrap it up for right now.
Okay.
It's never an end. That's why I tell people, if you ever want me, if there's anything else I can do, we'll get back together.
All right.
But also, I think that it is, there's other people doing interviewing, and sometimes you think of things, but it's so great that you share it, and I think it probably means a lot. To your other, to the other Marines that were either there with you or their families and all.
Yeah.
So a lot of them, there aren't people that either can recall as much. You've also been able to go back yourself, and so I get the joy of also sharing that, getting reactions from people who get to hear your story.
Right. Let me share one more thing.
Sure, of course.
I can remember when I went back, Charlotte and I were sitting on out over the Perfume River.
And say that this is when you made a trip back to Vietnam.
In August '94.
Right, okay, just for the record.
And Charlotte and I were sitting there outside our hotel, and we had a guide that was assigned and a driver. Both of them, I'm sure, were government agents. And in an unguarded moment, I asked my guide, Mr. Cho, I said, "Mr. Cho, how did we lose this war? We won every battle we fought." And he gave me he smiled at me. He said, "Mr. Lambert, we controlled your media." And right then I realized what he said was true. He said it wasn't the Vietnamese that controlled it, but it was their fellow communists that were controlling the media. He said, "We control the media."
Which circles